They called me a beggar, laughed at my beat-up car, and worshipped their flashy stepdad. What they didn't know? I was worth $100 million, and I owned the homes they lived in. I was done pretending. My name is Martin Blake. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Bozeman, Montana. From the outside, I look like any other 62-year-old man, modest clothes, an old car, a small rental home, and a steady job at the local hardware store. Nothing about me screams wealth or power, and that's exactly how I wanted it. My children, Ryan and Madison, grew up in a different world after the divorce. Their mother remarried a man who lived to impress. Over time, they stopped calling, stopped caring, and started treating me like I was a burden, not a father. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I just watched and waited. What would you do if your children mocked your humble life, not knowing you held their future in your hands? If that question lingers in your mind, take a moment to follow this story and share what you'd do in the comments. Sometimes, silence holds more power than words. It was the first week of fall in Montana, the kind where the air turns crisp and the leaves crackle beneath your feet. I remember that week clearly not because of the chill, but because of the shift. The one you don't see coming until it's already pulled you under. Back then, I still believed love could hold a family together. I believed that no matter how different Claire and I were becoming, our years, our children, would matter more. That belief didn't last long. Claire had always wanted more. More shine, more recognition, more admiration from people who didn't care if it was real. I preferred a quiet life. She preferred a staged one. While I saved, she spent. Where I found joy in fixing what we had, she chased the illusion of something better. Eventually, she found Gerald Dawson, a local contractor with a polished smile and a polished credit line. He was the kind of man who leased success and wore it like it was earned. Claire was charmed. Within a year of our divorce, they were married. The house I built became his. My name faded from the mailbox like it had never been there. I didn't hate Gerald. I hardly thought of him. What haunted me was watching Ryan and Madison drift toward his world, as if I'd never existed. Ryan was 16. All confidence, all image. He wanted the life Gerald advertised: cars, contacts, and cash. Gerald fed that hunger quickly. A new phone, designer sneakers, promises of internships. Today, Ryan works at an insurance company in downtown Bozeman, wearing suits that cost more than my monthly rent and dining where valet parking is expected. Madison was only 13. She had once been my shadow quiet walks, weekend pancakes, hand-drawn birthday cards. But she changed fast. Claire told her she deserved better than flannel hugs and backyard games. Gerald told her she looked like someone meant for success. Now she's a realtor, one of the most visible in the city. Online, her image is flawless. Her listings are sleek, her clients elite. She sells dreams she once believed I could never provide. At first, the distance came quietly. Fewer calls, missed dinners. Then one day it was birthdays with strangers, holidays with excuses, and conversations reduced to requests for money. I stayed in Bozeman. I stayed simple. They thought I'd given up. What they never knew was that I had quietly, methodically, built something far greater than appearances. They mistook modesty for failure. I let them. I wasn't building a life to impress them. I was building a test they didn't know they were taking, and in time, I would learn just how badly they failed. Spring in Bozeman has a way of pretending to be kind, sunlight warming the rooftops, birdsong returning like old friends. But that morning, kindness stayed outside my front door. Ryan and Madison arrived around noon without calling. Their car gleamed like a trophy as it pulled into my cracked driveway. Ryan stepped out first, his sunglasses reflecting the rust of my old pickup. He didn't even try to hide the sneer. "You still drive that thing?" he asked, nodding at the truck. "It's reliable," I said, simply wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. "Reliable?" he scoffed. "It looks like it belongs in a scrapyard." Madison followed, heels clicking on concrete, dressed like she was heading to a gala, not lunch at her father's place. Her eyes scanned my front porch like it was a crime scene. Inside, I'd prepared their favorites: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with a little bacon, the same meal that once had them racing home from school. Today, they picked at it like it was a plate of problems. Madison tapped her fork against the edge of her plate and said, "Richard took us to that new place in town last week. Imported steaks, Wine that didn't come from a twist-off cap. Glad you enjoyed it, I replied, keeping my voice measured. She smiled thinly. We're used to a different standard now. No offense. Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You ever think about upgrading your life, Dad? Like, even a little? I didn't answer. You work at a hardware store, he continued. Mom says it's like watching someone retire without ever having lived. Just then, the door opened without a knock. Claire stood there in a designer coat, arms folded. Her presence always carried judgment like perfume, subtle, lingering, impossible to ignore. Martin, she said sharply, what are you doing? They come here to visit and you serve them meatloaf? In this environment? She scanned the kitchen-worn cabinets, mismatched chairs, the fridge humming like a tired old friend. You know how this looks to them? She continued. You make them feel ashamed to be here. I looked at her, at them, and said nothing. Not because I had no words, because none of them would matter. Claire sighed and left just as quickly as she'd arrived, muttering something about appearances. Ryan and Madison followed soon after, murmuring vague goodbyes, not hugs. When the door closed, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, not just with what was said, but with what was made clear. I sat at the table alone, the meatloaf cooling in its dish. My children had tasted my food and rejected it, not for the flavor, for the life it represented. Still, I didn't break. Some storms are weathered not with shelter, but with stillness. I'd always believed in preparation. Even when life felt like it was crumbling, marriage over, children drifting, I kept my discipline, my habits, my investments. That night, after the visit from Ryan and Madison and the sting of Claire's words still hanging in the air, I opened my laptop. I hadn't touched the portfolio in months, maybe a year. I logged into my old brokerage account, expecting to see the same steady numbers I'd tracked for decades. Instead, I saw something else. Nina Figueres. The screen blinked back at me. 100,374,219 dollars. $100 million. I blinked again, half convinced it was a glitch. But the numbers were real. Compound interest, reinvested dividends, low spending, smart risks. 40 years of patience had quietly done its job. I sat there in silence, not with pride, not with excitement, just clarity. They thought I was poor. They thought I had nothing to offer. I had more than they could imagine. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I drove to a small office building on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, no signs, just a name I remembered. Ray Sullivan, private investigator. We'd met years ago through a mutual friend. Ray had once tracked down a runaway tenant for me, no questions asked. Ray looked up from his coffee when I walked in. Martin Blake, he said, standing to shake my hand. Haven't seen you in a while. I need information, I said. He raised an eyebrow. On who? My kids. Ray sat back. You sure? I nodded. I don't want gossip. I want facts. Where they live, how they live, what they're really doing. No sugarcoating. He didn't ask why. He just opened a yellow legal pad and started taking notes. After that, I drove home and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain where my children had once spilled milk and argued over cartoons. I thought of their sneers, their tone, the casual dismissal of everything I had been. I wasn't angry. Not really. But I was done waiting. They needed to learn something. No college degree, no sports car, no praise from their mother could teach them. They needed to learn respect. And I was going to teach it to them, not with yelling, not with guilt, not even with confrontation, with consequence. Because the thing about silence is, it gives you time. Time to think. Time to observe. Time to strike without being seen. Ray didn't take long. Within 10 days, he returned with a folder thick enough to warrant its own drawer. Got what you asked for, he said, placing it on the kitchen table. You might want to sit down. I nodded, but didn't open it immediately. I waited until he left. Made coffee, let the house go quiet. Then I opened the file. The first half was all Ryan. According to Ray's report, Ryan had been under internal review at his insurance firm for over a year. He'd been padding repair estimates, funneling the extra through a subcontractor account registered under a fake name. The numbers weren't small. Over $120,000 billed to the company for premium damage assessments that were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. His polished image, the sleek car, the weekend trips to Denver and Seattle, it wasn't just from a paycheck. He was stealing, plain and simple, and the firm hadn't caught him yet because he was careful. Too careful for corporate software, maybe, but not careful enough for Ray Sullivan. Then came Madison. Her file was smaller, but no less damning. She'd sold a 3-bedroom colonial in the West Hills 2 months ago. Beautiful listing. Perfect photos. Ray had gone to see it himself. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The walls had fresh paint, but behind them, mold. The plumbing had been patched barely. The foundation had cracks hidden by furniture and framed art. Ray found the contractor Madison used. A man named Leo Barnes, paid in cash, no permits, no inspections. She's using visual tricks, Ray had explained in his note. Professional staging, clever lighting, and strategically placed distractions. It's not illegal yet, but it's deception, and it's going to catch up with her. I closed the folder slowly, placing my hand flat on the cover. This wasn't just youthful arrogance anymore. This wasn't about them being ungrateful or dismissive. This was character. They were lying, manipulating, profiting off deception and assuming no one would ever look closely. I wasn't just disappointed. I was heartbroken. Somewhere along the way they'd learned the wrong lessons. Not from me, not from who I tried to be. Maybe from Claire, maybe from the world, maybe from Gerald's empty promises. But wherever it came from, it lived in them now. And I couldn't fix that with a speech or a hug, but I could hold them accountable. I scanned every page, made copies of the documents, stored digital versions in 3 different cloud accounts, labeled, time-stamped, backed up. Because if the day ever came when they questioned why I did what I did, why I didn't just let it go, I wanted them to see the truth. I wasn't just their father. I was their mirror, and it was time they looked closely. Some truths don't explode. They settle like dust after a storm, quiet but impossible to ignore. They don't shatter your world. They rearrange it. And once the rearranging is done, what's left is focus. After reading Ray's report, I didn't feel rage. No urge to call, confront, or correct. Just a stillness. The kind that comes when your eyes finally adjust in a dark room. I poured myself a drink, sat back, and thought about the next move. That's when I called Janet Cross. Janet and I had worked together years ago, back when I still dabbled in local property flips. She was discreet, methodical, and allergic to gossip. The perfect person for what I needed now. She picked up on the second ring. Martin Blake. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. I need 2 properties. Quiet purchases. Fast closings. What kind of properties? Ryan's apartment building and Madison's duplex. There was a pause. Then a soft, knowing laugh. Family matters? Something like that. It didn't take long. Through layered LLCs and tightly worded contracts, Janet helped me acquire both properties within 3 weeks. Ryan's apartment was undervalued, its owner eager to offload before refinancing hit. Madison's duplex was tied up in a pending tax lien. I paid cash. No haggling, no hesitation, no trail that led back to me. By the end of the month, I had legal ownership of the roofs over both their heads. Then I waited. For 1 week, I let everything continue unchanged. Rent came in, leases held, silence settled. Then I sent the notices, typed, stamped, and delivered through a management company I'd set up years ago just in case. New lease terms. Triple the rent, from $1,450 to $4,200. No exceptions. 30 days notice. No name, no explanation. Just a number, a policy, and a voicemail no one ever answered. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For too long, they believed security was owed. That comfort was permanent, that the world would adjust to their wants without asking anything in return. This was my answer. Not a punishment, but a pause. A moment that would force them to feel what they'd never considered, that comfort has a cost, and someone is always paying it. They had mocked my stillness. Now, it would speak louder than words. Late autumn in Bozeman carries a strange stillness. The golden leaves are mostly gone, and what remains is the cold, sharp, unkind, the kind that creeps through walls and into bones. I remember the first frost landing the same week the notices were delivered. To them, it came out of nowhere. A plain envelope. A standard clause. A rent increase so steep it didn't just sting, it destabilized. They didn't know the owner had changed. They didn't suspect the hand pulling the strings was mine. At first, silence. Then the scramble. Ryan called me 3 times in 2 hours. I let them all go to voicemail. Dad, the building's doing some illegal rent hike. This is serious. I can't cover this. A follow-up message came with more heat. I'm trying to close a big client. I don't need this distraction. Call me back. He tried negotiating with the property manager, offered to pay in installments, suggested his father could co-sign, but no one picked up. Madison wasn't far behind. She emailed, then called, then texted. This increase will bankrupt me. I just opened a second office. I can't move right now. Her tone shifted quickly. Do you know who owns this building, Dad? Can you help me talk to them? Still, I said nothing. Neither of them had savings for this kind of emergency. Not because they were poor, but because they'd built lives on thin margins and wide assumptions. They thought comfort was a right, not a privilege. A few days later, Claire showed up. The wind followed her inside like it had unfinished business. I know what you've done, she said, slamming her gloves on the counter. Tripling rent? Who does that to their own children? I didn't answer. She stepped closer, voice rising. They're scared. Ryan's considering a loan he can't afford. Madison's already defaulted on her warehouse lease. They're drowning, Martin. They're adults, I said, calm. They'll swim. This isn't teaching a lesson. This is vengeance. You're punishing them for not loving you the way you wanted. I looked her straight in the eye. Number, I'm holding up a mirror. If they don't like what they see, that's not on me. Her face flushed. You've become a stranger. No, Claire, I've just stopped pretending. She stormed out without another word. But the next blow didn't come from her. It came in the form of a letter. A civil lawsuit. Filed jointly. Ryan and Madison. Allegations of emotional abandonment, mental manipulation, intentional economic sabotage. Their lawyer claimed I had neglected my role as a father, used financial leverage to control and destabilize my own children. They painted me as dangerous, vindictive, unfit. They weren't just panicking. They were retaliating, trying to corner me, strip my credibility, use the law to flip the power. They still didn't know I owned the properties. They didn't know I had receipts, records, and a trail cleaner than anything they'd ever touched. They thought they'd trapped me, but I'd just moved my queen into position, and the game was far from over. They thought they had me cornered. The lawsuit was their last move, a desperate swing cloaked in legal language. Emotional abandonment, financial retaliation, parental neglect. Words crafted to paint me not as a father, but as a threat. The court date was set for mid-November. Early snow dusted Bozeman's streets, and the courthouse steps were slick with frost when I arrived. Inside, the hearing room was quiet, sterile, and serious. The kind of place where truth didn't shout. It simply waited. Ryan sat at the plaintiff's table, jaw tight, suit too sharp for someone claiming hardship. Madison was beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning every face like a threat was hiding in the walls. Their lawyer, a well-rehearsed man with too much gel and not enough principle, flipped through his opening notes. I took a seat alone. No lawyer, just a man with a folder. The judge opened the session. Ryan's attorney spoke first, as expected. He described a father who had abandoned his emotional duties, weaponized wealth to isolate and control, and inflicted mental and financial damage on his children as a form of quiet retaliation. He emphasized my refusal to communicate, to support, to provide guidance. Madison's name was invoked repeatedly. Miss Blake, he said, was not only denied access to emotional support, but placed in a precarious financial position because of her father's concealed actions. I remained still. Then the judge turned to me. Mr. Blake, do you have anything to submit before we proceed to testimony? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. From my coat, I pulled a small black folder. Quiet, unassuming, the kind of thing no one notices until it's opened. I walked it to the bench and handed it over. Inside, full records of both property purchases, timeline of acquisition, legally binding lease agreements, evidence that no laws were broken, no contact with tenants, no verbal or written threats, and most importantly, full ownership documents in my name via corporate entities I'd established years prior. The judge raised an eyebrow. So you're the legal owner of both properties? Yes, Your Honor. And you executed the rent increases as managing member of these LLCs? Yes. The room shifted. The air tightened. The lawyer stammered. But, but he didn't inform them. This wasn't a discussion. The judge looked over his glasses. Legally, it didn't need to be. Property owners, particularly corporate ones, are not required to seek tenant approval for rental adjustments, provided notice is given, which it was. Ryan's lips parted slightly. Madison whispered something to the attorney. They weren't prepared for this. They had expected a weak old man, not a strategist. You may sit, Mr. Blake, the judge said. I nodded and returned to my seat. I didn't defend my character. I didn't explain my silence. I didn't need to. The documents did that for me. Outside, the cold felt cleaner. There's something powerful about restraint, about choosing not to strike until every piece is in place. They came to tear me down. Instead, they saw what I'd built. No one spoke. The courtroom held its breath. Then I stood. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, I would like to make a final statement. The judge gave a small nod. I stepped forward not as a victim, not as a father on trial, but as a man finally done pretending. For years, I let them believe I had nothing. I said, motioning toward Ryan and Madison. I let them laugh at my car, mock my home, look down on my life. But silence isn't the same as weakness. It's just the pause before the right moment. I reached into my coat and pulled out a second envelope, thicker, heavier. These are my financials, I said. Every dollar earned, every stock held, every property owned. Total valuation as of last quarter, $100, $0.2 million. The judge raised his eyebrows, but it was the gasp from Madison that hit hardest. Ryan froze mid-blink. You're lying, he muttered, half to himself. I looked straight at him. No, son. I just stopped talking. The judge reviewed the documents quickly, then passed them to the clerk for verification. There was a strange pressure in the room now, like the walls had shifted inward. The lawyer fumbled through his notes. Claire, sitting in the back row, went pale. This changes everything, the attorney stammered. The narrative this was hidden, he manipulated. No, the judge cut in sharply. What I see here is a man who acted within the law, who exercised legal rights as a landlord without deception or coercion. What I don't see is evidence of abuse. He turned to Ryan and Madison. You petitioned for bankruptcy and claimed your father created an unsustainable financial situation. But he's proven ownership. He's demonstrated solvency. And most importantly, he's broken no laws. He looked down at the file again. Petition denied. The gavel hit like thunder. Ryan leaned forward in his seat as if trying to catch his breath. Wait, we didn't know, he never said. That was the point, I said quietly. You never asked. The judge straightened. Mr. Blake, do you wish to proceed with eviction notices? I do. There was no triumph in my voice, just certainty. The judge signed the order. Behind me, the silence turned electric. You could feel the realization moving through the room one mind at a time. The man they called irrelevant, forgotten, pathetic, was the one holding every card. Claire stood slowly, mouth slightly open but no words formed. Madison sat with her hands in her lap, no longer fidgeting. Ryan stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, too stunned to even be angry. I nodded to the judge, turned, and walked out. No dramatics, no revenge speech, just the truth left behind, heavy and undeniable. The headlines would write themselves later. But in that room, in that moment, the only story that mattered was the one none of them saw coming. The courtroom may have ended with a gavel, but the true unraveling began with an envelope. I sent it anonymously. 2, actually one to Ryan's employer, the other to Montana's Real Estate Licensing Board. Inside were the documents Ray had collected. Copies of falsified insurance estimates, bank transfers, shell accounts, photos of staged homes with hidden flaws, contractor statements, and buyer testimonies. I didn't need revenge. I just believed the truth shouldn't stop at the courtroom doors. 1 week later, Ryan was called into a meeting with his senior manager. What began as a quiet HR review turned into a full-blown investigation. His expense reports were cross-checked. Invoices didn't match repair records. His preferred contractor didn't exist, at least not legally. The company moved fast. He was terminated that Friday. Security walked him out of the building. His name was scrubbed from the company directory within hours. And when whispers spread about possible legal action, no one returned his messages. He wasn't just out of work. He was radioactive. Madison's fall was quieter, but just as steep. The board received my package and opened a formal ethics review. The family that bought the staged home on East Pine Street was the first to speak up. Then two more. Faulty wiring, mold, leaking roofs beneath new shingles. They felt cheated, and legally, they were. Her license was suspended pending further review. 2 lawsuits followed. A third came from a homebuyer who had signed with her just weeks earlier. The website she'd built, the curated feed, the professional gloss, the smiling photos with happy clients vanished in a day. And she? She moved back in with Claire. Then Claire called me. Her voice was raw, brittle with rage. "You did this. You destroyed them." I told the truth, I said. "What they did with it, that's on them. You could have handled it differently. You chose humiliation." "No," I said. "I chose accountability." She tried again, her tone softening. "Martin, maybe we can sit down, talk like—" I hung up. I changed my number that evening. By the end of the month, everything had collapsed. Ryan, once proud and untouchable, was begging old college friends for couch space and short-term loans. Madison stayed mostly indoors, avoiding cameras, emails, and court appearances. Her voice no longer sold anything. Claire, once the woman who loved appearances more than truth, now sat in a house full of silence. No more dinner parties. No more vacation photos. Just the sound of everything they had built on assumption and arrogance falling apart. I watched it all unfold from my porch. Not gleefully, just quietly, with the calm of someone who had warned the fire was coming, and finally let it burn. It was late March when they came back, one of those gray in-between days when winter hadn't fully left, and spring hadn't fully arrived. The sky hung low, overcast but dry, and the trees still stood bare, as if waiting for permission to bloom. I was on the porch, like always. The wood creaked under the old rocking chair as I watched a pair of sparrows peck at the ground near the steps. It was quiet, peaceful, earned. Then I saw them. 2 silhouettes at the end of the driveway. Ryan and Madison. They didn't walk like people with confidence anymore. There was no stride, no purpose in their posture, only hesitation, caution. A heavy silence stretched between their steps as they approached, each one slower than the last. When they reached the porch, Ryan spoke first. "Dad, can we talk?" His voice was rough, hoarse like he hadn't used it for anything honest in a while. Madison stood behind him, hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes glassy. I didn't move. I just watched them. Then Ryan dropped to his knees. Madison followed. It startled me not because of the motion, but because of what it meant. "Dad, I'm sorry," Ryan said. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I said about you, for the way I made you feel like you didn't matter." Madison's voice came softer. "We were wrong, so wrong, about you, about life, about what it means to be successful." She sniffed. "You didn't just build a fortune. You built us a life we didn't appreciate." They were crying now. Not performative, not dramatic, just breaking. And I stayed silent for a long while. Let the wind fill the space their pride once occupied. Then I stood, walked slowly down the porch steps, and stood in front of them. "I'm not heartless," I said quietly. "But I won't pretend this didn't hurt." Ryan looked up, guilt heavy in his eyes. "You turned your backs on me. Not just once. Repeatedly. And when I stayed silent, you thought it meant I had no power. But silence isn't surrender. It's a choice. And I chose it because I hoped one day you'd see." He nodded. "We see it now. All of it." I exhaled. Not anger, not relief. Just the weight of years pressing out of my chest. "I'm willing to forgive," I said. "But not forget, and not blindly." They looked at me. "You want back in this family? You want my support?" I continued. "Then show me. Show me who you are now, what you've learned. That your regret isn't just because you lost, but because you've changed." "I will," Ryan said immediately. Madison wiped her face. "Me too. No shortcuts. No fake smiles." I nodded slowly. "I won't hold your past over you," I said. "But I won't ignore it either. You'll rebuild from the ground up just like I did, and I'll be here if you stay honest." I didn't help them up. I let them rise on their own. Then I stepped aside and opened the screen door. "Come in. We'll start with coffee, like old times." And they did. That day didn't erase the pain, but it rewrote the ending. Forgiveness, after all, isn't forgetting what was broken. It's believing something better can still be built. I let go of the empire quietly. No headlines, no speeches, just signatures on parchment and the closing of one final folder. Everything I once owned, buildings that touched the skyline, accounts that hummed with compound interest, portfolios built brick by brick over 4 decades, was sold. Not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in peace. Because sometimes, freedom isn't found in what you gain. It's found in what you're finally willing to release. I packed up my life in Bozeman with the same care I once reserved for contracts and financial statements. A few boxes, a worn guitar, my father's Bible, and a photograph faded, sun-washed, of 2 children laughing in the backyard before the world got complicated. I drove west, toward a coast I'd only seen in postcards, toward salt air and winding streets, toward a town where no one knew my name or my story. Carmel by the sea. It felt like breathing for the first time after holding my breath for years. My new home was simple, a pale blue cottage with a white fence and wild jasmine curling over the gate, the kind of place where silence isn't empty, it's sacred. In that quiet, I began again. I walked barefoot through seafoam, drank coffee before sunrise, spoke to strangers without guardedness. And I met her, Eleanor Hayes, a woman with laugh lines deeper than judgment, eyes that saw beyond skin, and a voice that softened every sharp edge inside me. She wasn't impressed by my past. She wasn't curious about my net worth. She asked about my heart, and for the first time in a long time I answered honestly. With Eleanor, I began to speak not just about what had happened, but about what it meant. The betrayal, the downfall, the courtroom silence, the shattered relationships, the family story that nearly broke me, but also the redemption, the rebuilding, the grace. She reminded me that healing isn't a destination. It's a rhythm, a choosing, every day. I believe it was God who led me here not to escape, but to replant, to take a soul worn thin and press it into softer soil. Because our Creator doesn't just count losses, He multiplies what's left. And what's left of me after all that's passed is stronger, wiser, quieter. I'm still a father, still a man of principle. But now, I'm something else too. Free. If this family story stirred something in you, don't scroll away. Share it with someone who needs a second chance. And if you've ever been broken, know this: God's not done writing your story. Follow for more.